a mostly meat-based or meat-only diet, a lot of times for healing as an elimination diet. And obviously, there are a lot of purines in meats. If we could talk a little bit about what is uric acid, why does it matter, what is even a purine, and why that may even affect our community.
I'd be delighted. So the beauty of what we call the love diet, lower uric values, and maybe I should back up a little bit and talk about why we're here. Why is uric acid on the table? Why we're talking about it? And then we'll look at the inroads and dietary inroads and how they influence uric acid levels. In my day, and really still pretty pervasive, is the notion that uric acid is important only in the context of something called gout.
Right.
In other words, if your uric acid is sky high, you might form gout crystals in your fingers and toes. They apparently hurt, really quite aggressively. I've never had that. But so in these few people, very small percentage of our population, they would want to pay attention to the things that raise uric acid, things like purines, which are the breakdown products of DNA and RNA. Obviously, more of DNA and RNA are found in foods that have a lot of cells in them, like organ meats and other meats that we'll talk about. But that's been the context of uric acid, and the real research that has opened up the window in terms of what uric acid is, by the way, also involved in, meaning metabolic health. It really happened in earnest over the past 20 years, but the reality is that a really powerful textbook was written about uric acid in metabolism being really kind of a central player. That was published in 1894.
Wow.
By Dr. Alexander Haig. And so people have been talking about it for an awful long time. And yet, when I was in medical school back in the day, uric acid, gout, maybe kidney stones, but we really didn't, there was not much going on in terms of anything further that uric acid would do. Over the past 20 years, however, around the globe, we've come to a place of understanding that uric acid is so much more than just this end product of the metabolism of three things: fructose, sugar, alcohol, and what I mentioned earlier, purines, the breakdown product of DNA and RNA. In 2016, a collaborative paper from researchers in Japan and Turkey was put out. And just by giving you the title said Uric Acid in Metabolic Syndrome, from Innocent Bystander to Central Player. That really sums up why we're here today, because we've known for a long time that, interestingly, when you see a patient with diabetes, their uric acid levels are oftentimes high, or obesity, or hypertension, or dyslipidemia, or elevated triglycerides. Oddly enough, their uric acid seemed to be high. And we kind of just said, well, whatever, that's kind of interesting, but let's move on. Well, it turns out that it's not just happening to be elevated, it's the reason, an important reason why these situations develop. In other words, it's playing a causal role, a mechanistic role, meaning elevated uric acid activates pathways that we will talk about that raise blood sugar, that make the body make body fat, increase the blood pressure. All great things. It's great to have a lot of body fat and a high blood pressure and insulin resistance and diabetes. Yeah, it's a great thing if you were in our Paleolithic times facing starvation. In that context, you want to be insulin resistant because you want higher blood sugar to power your brain so you can avoid starvation and predation, meaning you not having food and not being eaten by another animal. You want to keep your brain powered. You want to have a little extra fat so you can make it through the winter. And you want to have a little extra fat so that you don't dehydrate. We're going to unpack that a little bit later as well. So the research over the past 2 decades reveals that when, for example, fructose is metabolized and forms uric acid, it's a danger alert signal for the human body saying winter is coming, right. Make fat, raise the blood pressure, increase what's called gluconeogenesis, the production of sugar in the liver, because we're going to need to power our brains because we don't want to be eaten and we got to be clever so we can find some food. So that's something that took place, a change in our ancestors between 14 and 17 million years ago. That's when there were, over a long period of time, over 1 million years, when the Earth was cooler during what's called the Middle Miocene period. Because the Earth got cooler, there was kind of a pressure on the existing primates, favoring those who could make more fat. And how they made more fat was they developed over time mutations in the genes that code for an enzyme called uricase, the enzyme that breaks down uric acid. And what they did was they silenced the gene. They silenced the enzyme so that they couldn't break down uric acid. Uric acid levels would go up and they would make more fat. Now, it's not like they became fat. Our primate ancestors didn't get big bellies and, weren't lying around the house. But they just had a little bit of an advantage, just a little bit more fat, a little bit more blood sugar, a little bit more inflammation to protect them from infection, a little bit more insulin resistance that allowed them an edge. And, over a long period of time, just a small edge can be really quite dramatic. We inherited that issue with respect to the uricase enzyme. So humans' uric acid levels are 4 to 5 times higher than those of many other mammals. And it serves again as a survival mechanism. For 99.99% of our time on this planet, we were lucky that our uric acid levels were elevated because it worked well with the environment in which we were, an environment that didn't guarantee food, didn't guarantee water, and an environment where we had to really use our heads to find food, to keep from being eaten, and to survive. Nowadays, those powerful triggers, primarily fructose, that's what our ancestors, how they triggered the production of uric acid. They would eat ripened berries in the late fall and in the late summer and in the early fall, ripened blueberries, for example. And that would be an environmental signal saying, hey, winter's coming, you better start making some body fat. And those of our ancestors that made more body fat, again, through this mechanism of uric acid, would survive. Now we are putting away pounds and making blood sugar and raising our blood pressure for the winter that never is going to come. We're not going to run out of food, quite likely, and water. So this presents what we call an evolutionary environmental mismatch, whereby those powerfully survival related mechanisms that kept us alive all these years are now being confronted with a dramatically changed environment. That began about 14 to 17,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. That was just yesterday. And then much more aggressively in the past 150 years with the profound and sudden increase in targeting that mechanism in our physiology with sugar. So make no mistake about it, the biggest issue is the sugar in the Western, in the global diet that is telling us to get ready for the winter that never comes, and just, creating this metabolic mayhem. And it's not just that we become metabolically deranged. It's important to understand that these metabolic issues set the stage for things like coronary artery disease and Alzheimer's and diabetes and several forms of cancer. So this becomes very, very important.
I saw a lot of that in your book, and that makes a lot of sense. Do you think then that it can almost arguably be the uric acid measure in your blood work be more powerful of a tool than, let's say, looking at LDL?
It's hard to say which is more important. Is it LDL? Is it particle size? Is it HDL triglycerides? Right. Is it HDL cholesterol ratio? Is it glucose? Is it using a continuous glucose monitor, the area under the curve? Is it A1C? Is it uric acid? And difficult to say how you rank them, number one. And number two, more importantly, how would you rank them for an individual based upon his unique or her unique personalized issues? So that's, precision medicine. Suffice it to say that it's very, very important. It ranks amongst the top in terms of things like body mass index and blood pressure and fasting blood glucose. It's really that important. And it's really what you and I are talking about right now is brand new. I mean, you're hearing, just smattering of this here and there suddenly about uric acid. And, we're going to blow it wide open and really enable people to have yet another powerful tool in their toolbox. There are a lot of neat developments really quite recently that allowing people to really rein in their metabolic health and gain control, far more aggressively than they would if they simply visited their doctor once a year
Right.
and checked in. You might have a pretty good blood sugar on that particular morning, but on the other hand, you may have terrible issues during the course of that one year that you don't know about. Same thing with uric acid. And, the beauty of the whole scenario is that you can check your uric acid at home, just like you do your blood sugar. You can do a finger stick uric acid test. You can buy a monitor without a prescription online. I use a device called UAssure, UA for uric acid, Sure, SURE. And right away, what is your uric acid? And, our recommendation based upon reviewing more than 400 scientific peer-reviewed journals is that you want to keep it at 5.5 milligrams per deciliter or lower. Now, the mainstream would say, hey, if your uric acid is lower than 7, you're in the normal range.
Right.
And I'll make 2 comments about that. First, that is a normal range as it relates to gout only, because that's when people are at a much higher risk, and it's also related to when that uric acid precipitates out to form those extracellular crystals. The other thing is, I think for everybody listening to your podcast and people who listen to my podcast who are open-minded and wanting to do their very best, the normal range is absolutely not good enough. Because what is normal? Normal is average, and
Right.
We need to do better. We need to go for optimal. So as it relates to things like cardiometabolic issues, we want 5.5 milligrams per deciliter or lower.
What is uric acid? Why does our body produce it? I know we get some from alcohol, fructose, and from the purines and the breakdown of them. One factor is that it helps with the urokinase and it helps to maybe store some of the fat, but is it the light switch that's now turning on metabolic disease? So the winter's coming. What is uric acid?
We had considered uric acid to be simply this product of our metabolism, sort of an end product that we would excrete, most of it. And so some of it would remain in our systems to just sort of hang around. That makes no sense at all, right? And that, as you mentioned, it is the end product, the final step in the metabolism in humans and in other primates of fructose. That fructose goes through a multitude of steps. There are various enzymes, beginning importantly with what's called fructokinase, which then increases the metabolism of fructose all the way down through hypoxanthine, xanthine, and then uric acid, with one very important, and we'll probably talk about it later, enzyme in that chain called xanthine oxidase. That's very important because we can influence xanthine oxidase aggressively with nutritional supplements like luteolin and quercetin. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it is the end product in humans. It's not the end product in other animals that do have uricase enzyme functionality, which we don't. They then metabolize it further to yet another waste product called allantoin. So then they're able to excrete that much more aggressively. But for us, that's the end of the line. We hope that we excrete a lot of it.
Right.
Some of it is actually reabsorbed. So we maintain what we end up measuring. That is our level. The metabolism of alcohol is quite similar. Of course, it doesn't use fructokinase. And the purines that are created by the breakdown product of DNA and RNA form AMP and IMP, which then through the same pathway ultimately end up as forming uric acid. So, for so many years for gout patients, they were told, don't eat a lot of meat, don't drink a lot of alcohol, and that'll bring your uric acid level down. I think it's good advice for a gout patient, but what got left out of that messaging was the fructose. And
Right.
by and large, these days, that's the big issue. The amount of fructose in the human American diet is phenomenal. I mean, it increased between 1970 and 1990. We consumed 1,000% more fructose. In the turn of the century, in the 1900s, we were consuming about 10 to 15 grams a day. Now it's 55 grams. Where is it coming from? Well, everybody gets drinking soda, sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. That's 55% fructose. We get that, so we cut out the soda. But Hey, it's the same amount of fructose in a glass of wonderful organic orange juice or apple juice, pretty much the same amount of fructose. So we have to then start thinking about, where is our fructose coming from? When we talk about the fact that 60% of the packaged foods in our grocery stores have added sweetener, and by and large, that's fructose or a derivative of fructose, that's scary,
Right.
because that's triggering the alarm signal to make fat for winter. And when you look around and you see the what's going on with overweight and obesity, a third of American adults right now isn't just overweight; it's a third are obese, and that number will increase to 50% in 8 years, in the year 2030. That's very worrisome when we think of the morbidity and mortality associated just with obesity. But it also triggers insulin resistance. We look at the 80 million Americans who are either diabetic or darn close. Hypertension, when we have 1 in 10 school-age children between the ages of 12 and 18 now diagnosed as having hypertension. Adolescents, these are kids with high blood pressure. That is astounding. And so we need to do everything we can. And, my purpose has been for many, many years is to reveal, pull back the curtains and reveal what's going on. In this case, mechanistically. I mean, we've known about fructose since a really powerful article in 1970 in the journal The Lancet that really said, it looks like fructose is related to various metabolic problems, but we didn't fully understand how it happens. And now that we see this whole connection to uric acid and how, unlike the metabolism of other things in the human body, when uric acid is metabolized, it actually increases its own production. Normally when something gets produced, then it shuts itself down so it can maintain a homeostasis. Not so with uric acid. It gets amplified as a way of really doing its best to keep us alive when we can't find food.
My community is mostly meat based, lots or meat only, and they eat a lot of foods and seafoods. Some people eat the organ meats like liver, which is the highest in purines, but seafood's high in purines as well, and so are some of the meats, maybe chicken a little less so. But if we know that alcohol is one that produces more uric acid, same thing with fructose, and then same thing with meats, if we were to reduce all of the fruits and or the sugary fructose and then also the alcohol, can we just be eating meat and be okay? One
It's a great question, and I think no one would know until you simply go and check your uric acid level. Who knows? I mean, there may be plenty of people in your community who already have a low uric acid level. They're in reference to this parameter, they're doing great. The biggest player, as I've mentioned, is fructose. And interestingly, it's not so much the fructose in fruit. Fruit is packaged. Fruit, is delivered with fiber that slows the fructose absorption, with vitamin C that helps with uric acid excretion, with bioflavonoids like quercetin that help reduce uric acid formation. So eating some fruit is not necessarily, in moderation, of course, going to be threatening. An apple a day, it keeps the doctor away, maybe two, but
Yes.
You can't go overboard. One fruit in particular called tart cherries or cherries is actually has been used and recommended for a long time, decades, for people with gout, because it contains certain of the bioflavonoids in great concentration that can actually help lower uric acid. On the cover of the book, you'll see there's a cherry. You see it's falling down. So the implication there is that helps you with your uric acid. So to be very specific in answering your question, don't know the answer. It depends on what how they're testing out. Now, I eat red meat. I eat chicken. I've never liked organ meats. If I like them, I might still be eating them because I really get the nutritional value of especially liver. Personally, I just never liked it. So what can I tell you? But what we have learned is that foods that really have a lot of cellularity, like the organ meats, like the sardines and anchovies and herring, are a higher source of purines, and that can threaten uric acid levels, but nowhere near the fructose. So Again, I'm a meat eater, very much so, and enjoy eating meat. But I'm also eating mostly vegetables in terms of the quantities of food that I eat, because the vegetables have the polyphenols to help lower uric acid. But I am really doing my best to get lots and lots of dietary fiber on my plate to nurture my gut bacteria. So that is something you don't get from eating meat. But then again, I very much enjoy eating meat. I think it's good for me. We fish a lot. I live on a boat for 4 months out of the year and catch salmon and crabs and prawns and gobble them up. But the point is that it's not about what you're eating, but how much, as it relates to those types of foods. And how much can you get away with depends on what your uric acid is, how you are managing that, and all the factors that go into uric acid, like exercise, fasting, sleep. All of these things are important variables to think about. When we talk about purines, and we got there because you had brought up the notion of organ meats, etc., understand that 2/3 of the purines in your body are created endogenously, are from you breaking down your own proteins and other tissues, and then releasing that DNA and RNA that is metabolized into uric acid. So only 1/3 of the purines are from the foods that we eat. The point is that if you check your uric acid in the morning, but yesterday you went on a really long run, or you went to the gym and you really overtrained, that muscle breakdown might well transiently raise your uric acid. So part of our recommendations are that you check your uric acid not after a very aggressive workout, not after a night on the town drinking a lot of alcohol. And that way you'll get a better sense as to what your average level may be.
So the main source is fructose. Do you think the fruits today are similar to the fruits in the past, where maybe there was a lot less meat within the fruit, and they're not these big luscious fruits, and so maybe there's a little less fructose, right? A lot of the fruits we eat today, and the way that we genetically modify our fruits, they're a lot sweeter, they're a lot bigger. And I think we do tend to eat a little bit more fruit than just one, I guess, a day.
Right. And I don't think, with all due respect, it's an issue of genetic modification.
Oh,
I think it's more along the lines of hybridization and a selection of specific cultivars. Without question, the apple of today is massive compared to even the apple of 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And the original apples that began around Turkey and Afghanistan were actually they were like crab apples, and they were in fact quite bitter, very low sugar content. So no question that there's been cultivation and hybridization to create the massive numbers of different types of apples that you can find that are clearly sweeter than they used to be and larger. But that said, I'm still going to go on record as saying, have an apple a day. I mean, some are sweeter, some are not. There's a big difference between a Macintosh and a Granny Smith.
Right.
And eat the peel, that's for sure, as well, as long as it hasn't been sprayed. Lots of good prebiotic fiber there.
Right.
But it's a world of difference between eating an apple and drinking apple juice.
Right.
Night and day. I mean, our prehistoric or Paleolithic ancestors would have eaten whatever fruit they could find, provided it was ripe, but they wouldn't stumble upon trees where there were bottles of apple juice hanging and grab them and start to chug them. That didn't happen. So I think looking at uric acid through the lens of, what it was like